Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to our fourth and final segment of our series, Radical Ion, Then, Now, and Tomorrow. My name is Vince Graham, and before introducing this week's speaker, I would like to once again thank our co-sponsors of this event. Those would be the Ion Trust, Charleston Moves, the Coastal Conservation League, Seaman Whitesides and Associates, our engineers, and Thomas and Hutton, our other engineers, William Means Real Estate, the law firm of Buse, Byers and Taylor, Grace Salon Spa, Pierce Law Firm, Low Country Local First, and the Charleston chapter of the American Institute of Architects. Please join me in thanking these sponsors. 3 weeks ago, urban designer Victor Dover spoke about the process of designing Ion. And then 2 weeks ago, Andres Duani, who collaborated with Victor in the initial design of Ion, threw down some challenges on how the neighborhood can be improved. Last week, transportation engineer Rick Hall spoke on some sophisticated approaches to traffic calming and how they can relate to enhancing urban quality of life. Batting cleanup in this four-part series is Dana Beach, Executive Director of the Coastal Conservation League. Dana founded the League in 1989. The League works to protect the natural and built environment of our state. His determined efforts have garnered numerous awards and recognition. He's the recipient of our state's highest honor, the Order of the Palmetto, also the James L. Dockery Southern Environmental Leadership Award, the National Wetlands Award from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the Environmental Law Institute, and the Environmental Awareness Award from the South Carolina General Assembly. Under Dana's leadership, the League has become recognized as one of the most successful state-level conservation groups in the United States. I can say without hesitation that without the League, the support of the League's staff and members, many of whom are here, there wouldn't be an Ion. Dana is a native of Columbia. He is a graduate of Davidson College. Did you study math there, Dana?
Math.
Math? Right. Yeah. Okay. Wake up.
I was trying to remember. It was a long time ago.
And he also has an MBA from Wharton. He's an exceptional writer and photographer, and I highly recommend his new book, DeVoe, about the DeVoe Bird Sanctuary. And best of all, he is married to Virginia Beach, who was here, Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, please provide a warm welcome to Dana Beach.
Well, it is wonderful to be here. And I can say honestly that Vince and Ion have really added a dimension to our work and our advocacy on the environment that without it we would have been sort of, just a one-dimensional tree-hugging, we're against everything group, and Ion allowed us to say, we're not against everything, but we're pretty picky. We're pretty picky about what we're for. Vince at earlier presentations has defined the term radical, which I won't define for you, but except to say that it means the root of something. And so Ion went back to its roots and to the roots of traditional city building. But what he didn't tell you is what Ion means. And I'm not sure, it might be because he doesn't know, but I looked it up on the internet, so I do know. And was a math major, as Vince said. And so here I've got a little intro. This is a surprise. Nobody knows this. What is an ion? It is, first of all, the definition, Ions are highly reactive, which is interesting. They rapidly react with ions of the opposite charge, which I think is kind of an interesting way to think about a community that is a good community where there's a lot of reaction and action going on. And here's something else I found on the internet. Now, what is that? Well, I'm not sure. I was not a chemistry major, but I figured out it must be something if you say, whoa, H is a house, N is a neighborhood, and so ion must be a place where houses converge to form a neighborhood. See, we used to say this QED when we finished a proof in math. So now you know. I'll leave this more attractive slide up for a minute here. Jane LaRoe and I were the first two employees, and by the way, if this gets too boomy, let me know and we can turn it down. The first two employees of the League, and we were tree huggers. We were natural history people. We love birds. We love forests. But we quickly realized in 1989, when the League was founded, that preserving farms and forests was not enough. It wasn't a small job by any means, but it was not enough to do that. And we actually became obvious to us that it was not even possible to preserve the rural landscape without achieving more efficient patterns of growth, without changing the paradigm of growth from sprawl to something else. At that time, sprawl was consuming about 400 acres of land in South Carolina a day. This was in the 80s and 90s. It seemed inevitable to all of us that Myrtle Beach would merge with Charleston, which would merge with Beaufort and Hilton Head, because why wouldn't it? We saw that on the eastern seaboard in the mid-Atlantic states, and it just seemed like that was, first of all, something that couldn't be stopped, and secondly, perceived to be what we defined at the time as progress. So we, Jane and I, recognized the importance in our board of changing the pattern of growth from one that was wildly consumptive of land, not only in the footprint of residential development, which I'll show you in a minute, but also in this insatiable demand for new highways, a huge land consumer, a huge pollution generator. But the problem, though, with us was we knew what we didn't like. We knew that sprawl was bad, but we did not know what we did like. And that's so true, I think, of many people who are well-intended, and I'll touch on that phenomenon. We just were not versed in what the options were, what were the alternatives to sprawl. We were having at the time a similar discussion about forestry, and I show this slide for that reason. We were enthusiastic outdoor people, but we really didn't know what the native landscape of the South Carolina low country should have looked like. It was so different. It had been changed so radically over time. Our first newsletter had a picture of Jane standing with her foot on a stump of a hardwood tree, looking very menacing, saying, "CCL discovers hardwood trees being cut in the Francis Marion National Forest." And we thought that was the deal. You know, hardwoods are good, and pines are bad. That shows you how little we knew. But the question really, in a way, was the same. Two ecologies, one a native forest ecosystem, and the other a native human ecosystem. It was clear what was wrong in both of them, that there was something wrong, but it was not at all clear what the path forward for either one should be for us. And I think that was true, I can say, for the community as a whole. So one of the smarter decisions we made was to go ask the right people. We went, for example, down to South Georgia to the land of the longleaf pine, beautiful pine, quail woods down there, and we consulted with a fellow named Leon Neal, who is a wonderful ecologist and really kind of invented the field of longleaf pine management with fire ecology. That forest type, which is what you see here, and this is a native orange-fringed orchid, which does, in fact, still grow in these longleaf, along with 400 other species of plants, the most diverse forest type in the temperate zone, very much under siege, like our vernacular towns and cities. We took Nellie, who was at that time 17 months old, down in the porter crib, and Jane and Virginia and Nellie and I all stayed in one room because we had a pretty limited budget, and it was pretty wild. Anyway, so the second challenge was to discover what was the native urban ecology of the Lowcountry. We held a series of seminars and workshops. We brought people from all over the country to speak, and even from England, from the head of the British Town and Country Planning Program. And one of the experts we brought was Andras Dewani. Vince told this story about Andras when he was here, but I want to repeat it because it reflects what an amazing impact he had on us and our thinking. And I think so many people all over the country. We were in the conference room of our office one day, and we were talking about, what our favorite movies were, and I said, Chinatown or something like that, and somebody said probably Ghostbusters or whatever, Night of the Living Dead. And Jane said, my favorite movie is Andras Dewani in Boston. And we had a video of him that we passed around and got more uses. I'm sure the tape wore out. Of Andras giving a presentation in Boston. And it was like the scales had fallen from our eyes. We now knew what really the native ecology of our urban areas and our communities looked like. Compressing 5 years into a few sentences, I and Vince and others, those of us who were intrigued and really, I'd say, even obsessed with this concept of urban planning and urban design, spent a lot of time reading the classics, Lewis Mumford's The City in History, and no one has ever read the whole City in History, I will say that. Jane Jacobs' Death and Life of Great American Cities, which many people have read the whole thing of. Kenneth Jackson, Crabgrass Frontier, wonderful books that explained why what we were seeing emerge in the American landscape was emerging, what was wrong with it, and what the alternatives were. And these books, along with a few select episodes of The Simpsons, really shaped the way we thought about the paradigm of growth and what we could do to build better cities and the tragedy of the current trajectory. So I've got a few slides reflecting at a summary level, kind of that very summary level. Some of our staff are here and they won't believe that it will be very summary, but it will be. Very summary level, how cities kind of came to be and why they are what they are. It's going way back here, way back. Cities emerge for a number of reasons, but basically there are two distinct forces. One is the force of organic sort of selection, like Darwinian selection. Basically, form follows need and function. Features that are beneficial at a given place at a given time prevail. Those that aren't disappear. And of course, it's all circumstantial. Even though different forms appeared in different places in the world, there were commonalities across civilizations. Planning is the second force that shapes cities. Now, planning can facilitate organic growth, but it also can be a hindrance to organic growth. We flatter ourselves in thinking that we have had a major impact on how cities emerge by prescribing certain land uses in certain places, densities, patterns, and you've heard all about that. Those of you who've been to the last 3 lectures have heard that. These days, it seems, though, that planning at best, what we call planning, zoning administration is really a more accurate description of it, is simply codifying what is, not creating new, better trajectories or facilitating more beneficial patterns of settlement. There are some notable exceptions, but the 20th century, especially the last half of it, the expression of planning really has been, more often, an instrument to stifle the positive organic evolution of cities. Fundamentally, cities and towns are instruments that facilitate social interaction. We organize complex human societies spatially in cities. They reflect the needs, the ideals, the beliefs, aspirations, the prejudices of their time, of the individuals and the communities that occupy them. Winston Churchill said, "We shape our cities and then they shape us." So there's this back and forth reciprocity between us as people, as enablers of cities, and cities as enablers of people. Cities emerged really relatively recently. We've got Kirk Sale here who's the expert on many things, but including the rise of agriculture and a lot of the early civilizations and the impacts thereof. But agriculture allowed, of course, food surpluses to be stored and food produced as a subset of society. It also gave people a place to occupy, specialization of labor, concentrated populations, and the like. And Uruk, in what is now Iraq, sadly because of what's going on there, thought to be one of the world's first cities about 3200 BC. Agriculture facilitated empire building and warfare. So Uruk had some very distinctive features, including this wall, which Gilgamesh helped defend, said to have been built by Gilgamesh. It was a mechanism of defense. We could call this the first urban growth boundary. Of course, in Oregon, if you violate the urban growth boundary, you probably are fined, $50, or maybe you're told to do something somewhere else. But in Uruk, if you violated it, you were drawn, quartered, and dragged behind a chariot around the city walls for a few days. A little bit different. Hippodamus, of Miletus, lived about 400 BC, and he is the one who is thought to have first prescribed cities built on a grid. Now this I want to make, and I think the prior speakers have all said this, but you cannot overstate the importance of the street network for city building. It is simply the essential DNA of how cities evolve, and when we get it right, we get great cities, and when we get it wrong, it is extremely difficult to reverse the problem. Blocks are the most efficient patterns of human settlement for moving one place to another, simultaneously organizing buildings in a confined space. Blocks do two things for transportation. Again, they minimize distances and they maximize route options. And Hippodamus knew that in 400 BC, and we still know that today. So we have walls and a grid of streets serving two essential social needs: defense and transportation. Now, the Enlightenment, this is John Wood, or it could be his son, John Wood Jr. They looked a little bit alike. But the Enlightenment rekindled an interest in city design and introduced a new element to the design of cities, the relationship of nature to cities. John Wood, in the Design for Bath, used a circus, they called it, named Crescent, and basically had a vista extending out into the countryside so that you could actually, living in an urban area, you could sort of enjoy and partake of nature, sort of an interesting way now to put a value on nature that really had probably been either dormant or not expressed in earlier cities. Maybe even we didn't want to see nature in earlier cities because it might have been considered a hostile place. Over time, Bath grew, and eventually this vista was terminated by this structure right here. Not a bad-looking structure, but it sort of does violate the concept of extending the city and bringing the nature into the city and the city into nature. Now, the idea of perspective, this perspective that John Wood was so interested in, had its origins in Renaissance paintings with Palladio, which so many things, of course, had their origins with Palladio, the Teatro Olimpico in Vicenza, and I think maybe Vince has been around Italy maybe has been there to see that. But romantic landscape painters like John Constable embedded towns within these bucolic settings, again putting great value on the spiritual significance of nature, the Enlightenment ideal. Jefferson, who was a great scholar, drew up the early plans for the city of Washington, D.C. The axis of the mall, the axis of the mall, of course, not only visually and physically, but symbolically was oriented to the west, which of course was the direction of the progress of America, the new frontier. Interestingly, Jefferson designed, he took a shot at designing Washington, and then they hired Pierre L'Enfant, who of course you know. And L'Enfant looked at Jefferson's design and described it as a grid as tired and insipid. He had just designed the grid, and so L'Enfant added the diagonal streets and the squares and made it what it is today. That concept, though, the axis was translated to the University of Virginia by, of course, Jefferson again, extending into nature, similar to Bath, and also similar to Bath. That axis was eventually terminated here by Cabell Hall, which was probably a mistake to put it here, but in any case, not a bad-looking building, so we can forgive them for that. Now, Ebenezer Howard, well-known design planner, shaped and gave voice to a new concept of the modern city and suburb. He wrote a book called Garden Cities of Tomorrow, prescribing a 6,000-acre region with 30,000 people living on 1,000 acres, which is about 10 houses per gross acre, which is about 10 times the density of a typical suburb today. So even though Howard called these the garden cities, they really were quite dense and quite village-like, but they were embedded in a garden, and that was the point. That was, of course, going back and drawing on inspiration from Constable and from John Wood and others. So this was the first time, though, that in planning that a city and the countryside were both explicitly designated together under Ebenezer Howard. George Cadbury and W.H. Lever were Howard's patrons, and they tried to use this concept, building modern industrial villages. The first attempt at a garden city was in 1903 in Hertfordshire by Raymond Unwin and Barry Parker, and some of y'all may have been there. But now what we see is the whole package. We've got the city, we have the grid, we have the vistas, but we also have a place embedded in a larger region. It is a city designed within nature, organized in connected blocks, and explicitly defined by, on its edges, a green belt of farms and forest that was considered and is still considered to be an essential aspect of living in an urban setting. Now, problems. So what happened here is that this fellow, Le Corbusier, who was the best-known planner of the 20th century, basically had some ideas that he thought made a lot of sense. But on top of his planning ideas, there was and maybe inspired by, was the Industrial Revolution, the automobile, the ability to build skyscrapers, all sorts of things, steel construction allowed people to build very high buildings, which they had not been able to until then, but built in a way that was new, sort of mechanistic, and detached from this naturalistic formulation of the city of Howard, certainly in Constable and Jefferson. Corbusier's design for Paris, which fortunately was never implemented, obliterated the old city and included 60 identical 60-story buildings with limited access highway going through the middle, through Paris. Think of I-73 with skyscrapers on the side of it. Corbusier was a member of a, not big surprise here, a proto-fascist group, and he sought work wherever he could find it, including with the Soviets, wrote favorably of Mussolini, and spent a good bit of time in Vichy, France, trying to convince the government to implement his plan for Algiers, which they also did not do, which was good. Corbusier was a classic Machiavellian, opportunistic megalomaniac, and tremendously damaging in his influence. Meanwhile, on the other side of the spectrum, the people who believed in trees and forests and the like, the Garden City movement was also, sadly, morphing into something that was quite different than what Howard had imagined. The planners misunderstood Howard. They were building curvilinear streets, lined by, in some cases, by trees, but at lower and lower densities, and they were segregating uses. Houses here, commercial over here, and all of this emerging with the assistance of the U.S. Department of Commerce zoning code of 1931, 9, something like that. Vince usually knows what that is. Somewhere in the 30s, let's just say. And what that all added up to was the catastrophe that has been city building over the past almost 100 years, but certainly over the past 50 to 60 years. Federal mortgage insurance was available, but only for new housing in single-use suburbs, not in mixed housing. There was not available even, actually it was not available in mixed, racially mixed neighborhoods, nor was it available in old neighborhoods, say West Philadelphia, and it literally drove the suburban wave across the country like a tidal wave, flowing across the country, converting the landscape from rural uses to urbanism of a sort at a rate that was unprecedented in history. Never had the planet seen this movement of development across it at that rate. Meanwhile, downtowns were being abandoned, urban blight and flight became a national tragedy, triggering another, sadly, unintended consequence, the phenomenon of urban renewal. Building big old apartment buildings, sort of like Corbusier would have imagined. These, of course, quickly became warehouses and incubators for poverty and crime. So, boy, things were not good in that era. But there were people who were pointing out the problem, and they were people like Jane Jacobs and Lewis Mumford, who, when asked about the interstate highway system when Eisenhower signed the bill, he said, I don't think they realize what they've done. And he was certainly true. That was true. Jane Jacobs fought Robert Moses, the great highway builder of New York, in his attempt to build an expressway through Greenwich Village. We can win on these things, and victories have been significant. In 1928, a Harvard-trained forester, Benton Mackay, wrote a book called Regional Planning, the New Exploration. And in it, he described the three elements of a region, sort of going back to Ebenezer Howard in a way. A place for people to live, a place for people to work on farms and forests, do forestry, provide food and fiber, and a place where man is a visitor, a primeval landscape, which for him was the Appalachian Trail, because most of you will recognize probably his name as the inventor of the Appalachian Trail. And I will not say anything beyond that about the Appalachian Trail. Provided a primeval, not medieval, component for metropolitan regions from Georgia to Maine. McKay focused on the tools that would be necessary to use to stem what he called the growing conurbation. And he recommended what he called dams and levees. Today we call them urban service boundaries, urban growth boundaries, and also protected land that stem the flow cities into the forest and farms that we believe should be preserved. Today, the tools that he recommended have been implemented, and in some places very effectively. In Oregon, for example, their land use planning program is statewide, and they've done a wonderful job of preserving the Willamette Valley, but making sure that the development, trying as best they can, within the boundaries is of a high quality and meets all of the standards that we know are important, that it's walkable, that it's sort of human scale, that it's mixed use, that it's socially equitable, that it's uplifting and inspiring. Those are the things that we know we need to do, and those are the things that are so difficult to do. Along the South Carolina coast, we've tried to, through hook and crook and every means we could think of, promote the concepts that Benton Mackay and Howard and others have articulated, and Jane Jacobs over the years. And I'm going to show you quickly what we were dealing with, what we are dealing with today. This is new. This is not, some of these slides are older, but Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Hilton Head are among the fastest growing areas on the Atlantic seaboard. They are the 3 fastest growing areas on the Atlantic seaboard. When we started, the league started, we were dealing, here we go, just to give you an idea of magnitude, more than 500,000 people moved to the South Carolina coast. I'm doing exactly what our wonderful public speaking coach said never ever do, and I always say never do it either. Never read your slides. It's terrible. But this is the only one I'm going to read. Okay, so we'll go on to the next one. Now, what is going on here? I can't read this one. So this is, like I say, this is sort of like the march of Burnham Woods from, you remember Macbeth, on Dunsinane, the march of Village Green, in this case, the city of Charleston, into the Ashley River Historic District. And it looks like it's sort of creeping up on Drayton Hall. That was the concern we had. We knew that there was a tremendous amount of growth, and we were able to actually characterize it with this series of slides in 1973. Now you remember, this is 300 years of settlement, European settlement in Charleston. This is what was developed, 45,000 acres in Charleston. We are right here. And the rest of the region, 3 counties, up to the Santee and the Edisto, was either national forest, forest land, or farm, or small rural communities. Just 20 years later, that area had grown by 250% to 160,000 acres. So we thought, when we saw this, we thought, how could we use this historical record to predict the future? And the future would be one we would predict if we did not succeed in making better decisions about growth. We got together with Clemson, the Strom-Thurmond Institute. We found some money for them to do a projection, very sophisticated set of differential equations looking at infrastructure and zoning and where development already was. And this is the map they came up with. The projection for 2030 is this. Now this, everybody who saw it said what you just said, or worse. But what we wanted to make the point that if we don't change the pattern of development, this is where we will go. This reflects the same ratio of land conversion to population growth. If we continued to grow in the patterns that we were growing in, then we would end up like this. The good news is that over the course of roughly that same time, from 86, beginning here with the Francis Marion being protected, the rest of it, this is Charleston County right here, Berkeley, Dorchester, and just a little bit of protected land and this urban footprint here. I'm going to show you, the next slide shows you the progression of conserved land. Now, I said we originally started out wanting to protect land, but also realized we needed to promote better cities. The conserved land is now 1.2 million acres on the coast of South Carolina. And this is the result of literally hundreds and hundreds of actions, of easements that were donated voluntarily by Ted Turner and others, that were purchased through the Charleston Greenbelt program and the Conservation Bank, of better zoning, stabilizing land, making landowners feel more comfortable about putting land under easement. And so this is the outside. This is Benton Mackay's primeval and working landscape. This is the vision. We don't show this to many people because they think the black helicopters are coming and we're going to, lock up that sort of stuff. But what was happening inside that area, that was just as important to us as what was going on in the rural environs. What was going on inside was a little bit less encouraging. Actually, a lot less encouraging. It's easier to protect land. One thing I've learned, it's easier to protect land than it is to promote better growth and better quality growth. There's so many factors that come to bear on why cities grow the way they do. Zoning codes, investment in transportation infrastructure, also known as highways. Markets obviously play a role, but not the biggest role. So here's where we were going. Now this is the dystopian present and future for our region. This is where, if we go here, we will have lost. It will be all over. This is Cane Bay up in Berkeley County. And as you can see, there's not a single thing in here that would resemble anything John Wood or Ebenezer Howard or Pierre L'Enfant would have believed in, or Hippopotamus of Miletus. There's no block layout here. This is single-use, low-density housing designed in these, some people call dead worm subdivision cul-de-sacs, whatever you can call them anything you want. But the problem with this is not that it's not an attractive sort of template, but that it simply is a failure in terms of its ability to accommodate what people do every day. Moving around. There is one entry and exit right here on Highway 176. One. Now this is 5,000 acres. 5,000 acres, which is many, many-fold bigger than the peninsula of Charleston. There will be about 9,000 units, so not an awful lot of units here, on 5,000 acres, that is. And all the green stuff is just future development. That's not going to be a forest or a farm there. That's just what they haven't developed yet. So Cane Bay is our nightmare future. This brings me to where we are here. Here is Ion. Now here is a very different pattern. You see the mixed use. We're right here in the middle of it. Could have been more if we got more approval from Mount Pleasant to do more. It's a very nice grid of streets. Ebenezer Howard would be proud of it. It's got wonderful public spaces. It's got a mix of housing types to the extent that can be available under the zoning that was available. There could have been apartments if the town had allowed them, but it didn't. But the point is, this is what we felt was a wonderful addition to the inventory of human settlement that we hoped would be a model for the future. It has been something of a model, but it's an uphill battle. And I'm going to show you what I think may be a good example, maybe metaphorical, spatial example for where we are. If this is Cane Bay, 5,000 acres, this is Ion at 244. Right, 244. Okay. So that's a pretty good representation of the good versus the bad proportionately. You've got here, about 20 times as much bad development as we have good. in the emerging city. Now, I'm going to just get on a couple of points here, and I'll finish because I promised our staff I would not go on as long as Recall, who was great, by the way. But if you really want to learn about road design, you would have been in heaven for 2 hours. So anyway, Charleston by design. Now, I didn't get to see this thing. I got here too late. But I did take this picture through the door of the city gallery. And this was an exhibit by the city of Charleston on what they call the restoration of the city from 1970 to 2015. And there were things in there showing what had happened, talked about Johns Island, the annexation, and that sort of thing. So this is the Charleston that we all know and love, and it is the model for all great urban development. There's not a single planner, designer in America who hasn't looked at Charleston and tried to figure out how to replicate its brilliance. And it has everything that you could want. I mean, it's got the grid, it has fantastic public spaces, it's got wonderful, housing, but also integrated with non-residential uses. Ed grew up here, he knows all about that. And also so did 15 generations of Ball. So probably built Charleston. So anyway, the point is that this is what we think about when we think of Charleston and the peninsula. But this is the new Charleston, and this is circa 1982 or 3. This is part of certainly that era that was featured in the restoration of a city. This is the Glenn McConnell so-called Parkway. Everything is a parkway. See, parkway, you can tell because it says it on the sign. And here you've got a development that looks no different than Cane Bay. These cul-de-sacs taper off here. There's no connectivity. There's no mixed use. There's no ion. There's no nothing. It's as different from ion as night is from day. But this was the pattern that replicated itself throughout West Ashley and James Island over the course of that period of 40 years. Here's a more recent example, even up on Cainhoy Peninsula, called Nellyfield, which I hate because my daughter's name is Nellie, and this is a terrible development. I wish we had a better place that was named after her. But the same thing, and Natalie, who's somewhere around here, has been struggling to simply get the Berkeley County school system, who are putting a school in right here, to connect the subdivision here to the school so that children can walk there and parents can drive a car. And yet, we've not so far been successful to simply make that connection. This is how bad planning is today, and how disastrous it will be when every single child who goes to the school and lives here has to be driven out on this road and then down here to the school. And that will mean Plymouth Ferry will be completely gridlocked, which it already almost is, even without the school here. So this is the city of Charleston. I mean, this is folks we know and love. This is not an interstate, well, it is sort of. I was going to say it's not an interstate interchange on I-26, but this is also the city of Charleston. So I want to summarize this by saying this. The challenges we have to achieve any kind of functionality and beauty and the things that matter to people and to the environment, the challenge is to tame the suburbs, to make the suburbs humane again, to refit them so they function for people on feet and on bikes and in buses, in addition to providing for cars, to do a better job of building as we go out, and also a better job of rebuilding our existing urban areas. This occurred over the period of time that was exhibited in the City Gallery exhibit. This is 1970 to 2015. This is the crosstown, so-called up here, and Savannah Highway, and then this is Lockwood Boulevard, and this is the Cloverleaf. It's an interstate. So they, instead of taking the nature and bringing it into the city like John Wood wanted to do, we've taken the interstate and brought it into the city. And we've plopped it right down in the middle of historic Charleston. The crosstown may have been the greatest tragedy for the city, a single tragedy that the city has had perpetrated on it ever, maybe in 300 years, because it split the city into two pieces. The north part, which became sort of abandoned and poor, and the south part, which fortunately stayed, pretty vibrant. So there is an opportunity to change that, and this is my second point. One, better decisions in how development occurs beyond the edges of the city in the new suburbs, and two, better decisions about how we redevelop these urban places. We have been working with the West Edge folks who are building a big new development right on Lockwood and the Crosstown. I'm sure you all know about it. And their original proposal was to connect the two was to put a caged walkway over the Crosstown here to MUSC, so the people who lived there could walk in a cage across the Crosstown, and it didn't slow anybody up, right? So when I was in Minneapolis, I was one of the conferences I went to. It was fascinating. We went to see some of the stuff that didn't work in Minneapolis, and one of the things that didn't work was a caged walkway that went over one of the highways. And the reason, and this is the reason was fascinating, there was a community of Native Americans, and they were having trouble getting across the road. And so they said, we just build this walkway. And it's got to have a cage because you don't want people to fall out of it onto the road. Well, the Native American, that particular tribe, did not believe in your feet coming off the ground. I mean, that's sort of a simplistic way to put it. But they wouldn't use it. They would not use it. And so instead of, they continued to sprint across this high-speed roadway. So the good news is this. Oh, wait. By the way, I want to make one point. I'll make this one quick. Okay, you might say, okay, this to me is the dumbest thing of all. I mean, it's so unnecessary. It's not as big a deal. But here you've got an intersection right here with a traffic light. I try usually not to turn my back to the projector because I have a bald spot up here. But I'm going to do that anyway. So here's an intersection. Well, God forbid you have to stop at an intersection. I mean, that would be horrible. You might waste 18 seconds or 20. So here we have, instead of the intersection, we have a flyover of the intersection in downtown Charleston. This is certainly not a traditional element of urban design anywhere, certainly not in Charleston, but that's what we have. Well, you could say, all right, well, maybe that was in the 50s when people were really brain dead and they were eating Hostess Twinkies for, all that kind of stuff. But no. Back in you look back, this is the magic of Google Earth history. Well, here it is, the flyover. Y'all know it. Okay, so that was there in 2003, but not in 1994 when the city of Charleston was being restored and had been under restoration for 24 years. It wasn't there. So somewhere between 94 and 2003, I think it was around 2000, this thing was added by someone who thought it was a good idea. And if you drive along in that area today, you can see what a bad idea it was. I mean, it is the most hostile. It's as hostile as any place anywhere in South Carolina. I mean, it's terrible. You've got the Courtyard Marriott here, bordered. You're in a cavern with, on the other side, the entrance ramp to the connector. So anyway, the good news is that we have been working with West Edge, and we're working with the city, Jacob Lindsay, who's been at some earlier of these things and didn't come to this. But the developer has been willing, and we're delighted at this. Actually, let me say, I got this upside down. Here is West Edge. The crosstown is here, and then the river is over there, and this is West Edge up here, and the police station over there, in case you all know where that is. I hope you don't. Anyway, I won't comment on that. But so here's Haggett Avenue, and it just stops. You know, Haggett stops right here. But if you continue to cross here, there's a Wendy's right here that's closed. And we've worked with the developer, and we said, please do not put the cage over the crosstown. Extend Haggett and create real intersections here that people can walk where there are long lights, and maybe even some sort of, like Recall was showing, articulated pavement that you can know that you're actually in a place where there are people who will walk, and they will walk. This is a housing project over here, which really got the short end of the stick. But this is a tiny thing that to me is in some ways like Ion, although it's tinier than Ion, obviously. But it's the first step in re-civilizing this part of the peninsula of historic Charleston. And we are tremendously excited about it. Just heard the other day that we may have the owner of Wendy's may be willing to negotiate a deal on this. So I will simply end by saying, I was supposed to put a better slide here, but that's black. But the future is what we make it. But I will say this: we cannot leave anything for unattended. We can't assume that some leader somewhere is going to achieve better urban design. It's simply not going to happen unless we, those of us who really care about it, play a major role in that. We have a mayor's race tomorrow. Whoever wins, I can tell you, I like them. I know all of them, and I like all of them, but they are not going to be able to just go forth and do good. We're going to have to be a big part of that equation. It's a matter, in the strangest kind of way, of the need more than ever before in democracy weighing in on the quality of our cities and towns and our countryside. So it's been delightful to be here. It's always delightful to come to Ion. It's an inspiration that it was realized. You know, it's easy. Ideas are cheap, but realization is not at all. And so 20 years, happy birthday to Ion, and happy birthday, 25th birthday to Vince.